When my father died, my mother warned me not to attend the funeral. He never cared about us, she said. But I went anyway, and the truth I found there shattered me. Hi, I'm Rose Miller, 25 years old, and the man I spent 2 decades hating never deserved a single moment of it. All my life, I believed my father died when I was 5. That's what my mother told me. But one morning, I received a letter that proved she'd been lying to me my entire life. It started on a Tuesday. I was making coffee in my small apartment in Asheville, North Carolina, when I heard the mail slot click open. Bills, usually. Advertisements. Nothing that ever changed my world. But that morning was different. Among the usual junk was a formal envelope, cream-colored, with careful handwriting across the front. The sender's name made my blood run cold. James Miller. Deceased. I dropped my coffee mug. It shattered across the kitchen floor. I couldn't move. My hands trembled as I tore open the envelope. Inside was a funeral notice, printed on heavy cardstock. In memory of James Miller, beloved father and brother. Services this Saturday at St. Michael's Church. I read it 3 times before the words sank in. If my father died when I was 5, then who was the man they were burying this weekend? For the rest of that morning, I sat on the kitchen floor surrounded by broken porcelain and scattered thoughts. My childhood felt like it was cracking alongside the mug. I kept thinking about every question my mother brushed away with a sharp "don't ask about him again." Your father was a cruel man, Rose. He hurt me. He's gone now. You're better off forgetting him. I was 5 years old when she sat me down and told me he'd died. I remember crying for weeks, clutching a stuffed bear he'd given me, while my mother watched with cold eyes. It hit me then that I'd never truly known my own family story, only my mother's version of it. And suddenly, that version felt like a cage I hadn't noticed until the door creaked open. Now, staring at this funeral notice, I realized something terrifying. What if everything I believed was built on lies? I grabbed my keys and drove straight to my mother's house. The entire 20-minute drive, my heart pounded against my ribs. Questions flooded my mind faster than I could process them. Was there another James Miller? Had someone made a mistake? Or had my mother looked me in the eye for 20 years and lied? Memories came flooding back, flashes of moments that never quite made sense before. The day I found old men's shoes in our garage when I was 8, and she said they belonged to a neighbor. The time a strange man waved at me at a grocery store, and she yanked me away before I could wave back. At the time, I thought she was just being protective. Now, I wasn't so sure. Maybe she'd been protecting herself. When I pulled into her driveway, I noticed Dennis's expensive car parked there. Dennis was my mother's partner, a wealthy businessman she'd been with for as long as I could remember. They lived in a beautiful house with marble countertops and designer furniture. Everything gleamed with money I never understood the source of. I walked through the front door without knocking. My mother, Martha, sat at the kitchen island sipping coffee from a delicate china cup. She was dressed impeccably as always, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. Dennis was on a business phone call on the sofa in the spacious living room. She looked up when I entered, her smile fading when she saw my face. "Rose, darling." What a surprise. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I slammed the funeral notice onto the counter between us. "Mom, I just got this in the mail. It's a notice about Dad's funeral." The change in her expression was instant. Her face went rigid, her fingers tightening around the coffee cup. For just a second, I saw something flash in her eyes. Not anger. Fear. "That must be a mistake," she said, her voice too controlled. "Your father's been dead for 20 years, Rose." "Then why does this say he just died?" She stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "Has to be some sort of mistake," she said, trying to hide her fear. Like I had opened a box that should never be opened. "Then I'll go find out what kind of mistake this is," I replied. "Drop it. You don't owe that man anything. He was a violent drunk who abandoned us when you were barely old enough to remember him." She looked at me, waiting for a reaction. I stayed quiet. "He never cared about us anyway,"
she said.
I stared at her, searching her face for truth. But all I saw was a wall, carefully constructed and defended. "I'm going to the funeral." "You will do no such thing." Dennis heard us arguing, but was focused on his call. My mother stepped closer, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "If you go there, don't bother coming back to this house or my life. Do you understand me?" In that moment, I realized something. She wasn't angry that I wanted to attend. She was terrified of what I might discover there. And that fear told me everything I needed to know. I picked up the notice, folded it carefully, and put it back in my pocket. "We'll see about that, Mum." As I walked out, my legs felt numb, but my mind was sharp. Every sound, the click of the door, even the click of my footsteps against the hardwood floor, felt louder than usual, like the world was holding its breath. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of my mother's disappointment. I was afraid of the truth waiting to be found. But I also knew, whatever it was, I needed it more than I needed her approval. Behind me, I heard her calling my name, her voice shrill with panic. But I didn't turn around. Saturday arrived gray and cold. I drove 3 hours to the small church listed on the notice, my stomach churning the entire way. Part of me wondered if I was making a terrible mistake. What if my mother was right? What if this man had been everything she said? But the other part of me, the part that had always felt something missing in my childhood, needed to know the truth. St. Michael's Church was small, nestled between oak trees in a quiet neighborhood in Beaufort, South Carolina. I parked and sat in my car for 10 minutes, trying to gather courage. Finally, I stepped out, wrapped my black coat tighter against the wind, and walked inside. The church was half full. Mourners sat scattered throughout the pews, their heads bowed in prayer or grief. The service was yet to begin. I slipped into the back row, trying to remain invisible. But as I glanced around, I noticed people turning to look at me. No one knew who I was. An older woman sitting 2 rows ahead turned fully around. Her eyes widened like she saw something familiar in my face. She stood and hurried toward me, moving with purpose. "Rose?" she asked, her voice shaking. Before I could react, she wrapped me in a tight embrace. "Oh, my dear child, you came. You actually came." Her voice was teary now. I stood frozen, confused. She pulled back, holding my shoulders, tears streaming down her weathered face. "I'm Adeline, your father's sister. He talked about you every single day, right up until his last breath." I was speechless. It was happening all too fast. "Thank goodness you came. You look so much like him." My throat tightened. But my mother said he abandoned us, that he was cruel, that he died 20 years ago. Adeline's expression shifted to something between sadness and anger. She shook her head slowly. "That man never abandoned you, sweetheart. He wrote letters every month for 20 years. He called. He sent birthday gifts. Your mother never answered. Not once." Adeline's words hit me like a physical blow. I imagined my father at a small kitchen table, year after year, writing my name on envelopes that would never be opened. Maybe he watched birthdays pass by, hoping each one would be the year I came back. The thought made my chest ache. All those lost moments, first day of high school, graduations, heartbreaks, he'd missed them not by choice, but by someone else's design. The world tilted beneath me. I grabbed the back of the pew to steady myself. "What?" "He was heartbroken," Adeline continued, her voice breaking. "When he got sick, all he wanted was to see you one more time. He died still hoping you'd find your way back to him." Tears blurred my vision. Around us, other mourners stared. Adeline reached into her purse and pulled out a small silver key. "He told me to give you this if you ever came looking for him. It opens the safe in his bedroom. He said you'd find everything you need to know there. I took the key, its weight somehow heavier than it should have been. My fingers closed around it. Where? I'll take you. The rest of the funeral passed in a blur. My chest felt heavier with every hymn, my mind echoing with questions I wasn't ready to face. But when I finally saw him lying there, peaceful in the coffin, his features a mirror of my own, I broke down. I looked exactly like my father, had his eyes, nose, and lips, and I'd spent my whole life hating him. Before I go on, I'd really love to know where you're listening from. Tell me in the comments, and subscribe if you're enjoying the story so far and don't support what my mother did. After the service, Adeline drove me to a modest house on a tree-lined street. The paint was fading, the yard overgrown. She unlocked the front door and led me through rooms that smelled of dust and medicine and memories. His bedroom was small, a simple bed, a dresser, and a nightstand with a lamp. On the wall hung a single photograph of me as a toddler, laughing in a park. I walked to the closet where Adeline pointed. Behind hanging clothes was a small wall safe. My hands shook as I inserted the key and turned it. The lock clicked open. Inside was a wooden box, worn smooth from handling. I lifted it out and carried it to the bed. When I opened it, my heart shattered. Photographs. Dozens of them. Me as a baby, cradled in my father's arms in a hospital room, his face glowing with joy. Me at 2 years old, building sandcastles on a beach, while he knelt beside me. Me at 4, riding on his shoulders, both of us laughing. There were crayon drawings I'd made, their edges yellowed with age. Pictures of stick figures labeled me and Daddy, in messy child handwriting. Birthday cards I'd apparently made for him, signed with uneven letters spelling love, Rose. My mother was not in any of these photos. Beneath the photos was a sealed envelope. My name was written across it in careful script. I opened it with trembling fingers and unfolded the letter inside. My dearest Rose, if you're reading this, I am gone. I never stopped loving you, though I know you may hate me. Your mother was once kind, but after I got sick, everything changed. I lost my job. Our savings disappeared into medical bills. I lost my strength, my pride, my ability to provide. But I never lost my love for you. She left me when I needed her most. Said she couldn't live poor. Said she deserved better. She'd already found someone else, a man named Dennis with money and status. She took you with her. I tried to reach you. Every letter I sent came back unopened. Every phone call went unanswered. She cut me out completely, and she made sure you grew up believing I was the villain. My only wish is that you forgive me. Not for leaving you, because I never did, but for not fighting harder to stay in your life. I collapsed onto the bed, clutching the letter to my chest, sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe. All the anger I'd ever felt for him twisted into guilt so sharp it almost made me sick. Every hateful thought, every time I blamed him for my lonely birthdays or my mother's coldness, it all turned to ash. I wished I could go back in time and tell that 5-year-old girl that her father wasn't the villain, that she could stop hating him and start missing him instead. The pain was so much I let out a piercing scream. Adeline, who had stepped out to allow me some privacy, came running into the room. There was worry in her face. She saw me folded on the bed, crying. She wrapped her arms around my shoulders. He loved you till his very last breath, sweetheart. You were his only light in all that darkness. I hated him, I whispered through tears. All my life, I hated the wrong person. I stayed at Adeline's house that night, unable to face the world. But by Monday morning, something had hardened inside me. My grief had transformed into something sharper, something that demanded answers. I drove back to my mother's house, the wooden box sitting on my passenger seat like evidence in a trial. Dennis's car was in the driveway. I could hear laughter through the windows as I approached. I walked in without knocking. My mother and Dennis sat in the living room, relaxed and smiling. Martha was showing Dennis a picture of a necklace she wanted him to get her. The moment she saw me, her face went pale. The wine glass froze halfway to her lips. "Rose, what are you doing here?" I didn't answer. I walked to the coffee table and set the wooden box down with deliberate care. Then I opened it. "You told me Dad died when I was 5. "Rose, don't." She tried to interrupt me, but I continued. "But he was alive for 20 more years. And he never hit you, did he?" Dennis set down his wine, his expression confused. "Martha, what's she talking about?" I began laying out the photographs, one by one. Me as a baby. Me at the beach. Me laughing on my father's shoulders. The birthday cards. The drawings. He kept everything. Every picture. Every memory of me. While you told me he was a monster. Martha lunged forward, trying to snatch the letter from my hand, but I pulled it back. "He died still loving you, Mom. And you left him to die alone. He didn't die 20 years ago. He died last month." "Deny it, Martha. Deny it." I broke down crying. Dennis stood, his face darkening as realization dawned. "Martha, is this true?" She stammered, her carefully constructed world crumbling. "It's not what it looks like, Dennis. He was sick. He couldn't provide. I had to think of Rose's future." "You lied to me," Dennis said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You told me he was abusive, that he'd hurt you, that you'd escaped with your daughter, that he died a few months after." I handed him the letter. He read it in silence, his jaw tightening with every line. When he finished, he looked at Martha with disgust. "You used me. You used your own daughter. Everything you told me was a lie." Martha began to cry, reaching for him. "Dennis, please. I did it for us. I did it so we could have a better life. Get out." He barked at her. "What?" "Get out of my house. I don't care where you go. Just get out." His voice grew louder. Martha fell to her knees, sobbing, begging. But Dennis turned away, his face set in stone. I watched quietly, feeling nothing but empty certainty. For years, my mother had painted my father as the villain in our story. But that night, the truth spoke louder than any of her lies ever could. As I walked toward the door, I heard her calling my name, desperate and broken. I didn't turn around. I'd spent my whole life looking back at ghosts. It was time to look forward. I went back to Adeline's house the next evening. We sat on her back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. I held my father's letter, now folded and worn from my constant reading. Adeline brought me tea and sat beside me in comfortable silence. "Your father would be proud of you, Rose." I smiled faintly. I found out later that Dennis threw her out that same night. They were never legally married, so she had no claim to anything. She lost the house, the lifestyle, the security she'd built on lies. Adeline touched my shoulder gently. Some people spend their whole lives running from truth. Eventually, it catches up. I nodded, staring at the letter in my hands. For years, I lived believing hate. Now I live knowing truth. And somehow, that feels like forgiveness. The next morning, I drove to the cemetery. I found my father's grave beneath a young oak tree. The headstone was simple, just his name and dates. No flowery epitaphs. No grand statements. I knelt and placed the letter against the stone, weighing it down with a small rock. "You asked for forgiveness. You have it now, Dad." As the wind moved through the trees, I felt something like warmth brush against my cheek, gentle, almost like a touch. I wanted to believe it was him, saying goodbye the way he never could in life. Standing there, I realized the truth didn't just free me from my mother's lies. It freed him, too. His story was finally told, and maybe that was all either of us ever needed. As I walked back to my car, I felt something lift from my shoulders. A weight I'd carried for 20 years without even knowing it. My father had loved me. That was the truth. And the truth, finally, had set me free. If you've ever discovered that the story you were told about your family wasn't the whole truth, drop a comment below. Let me know I'm not the only one who had to rebuild their understanding of the past. And if you believe in the power of truth, no matter how painful it might be, subscribe to this channel. Because some stories need to be told. Thank you for listening.